muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos todos y todas. Welcome to CENTRO. My name is Ángel Antonio Ruiz. I'm the Art and Culture Director here at CENTRO. And today we have a very special cafecito. 3 years ago, the government of Puerto Rico declared last Sunday, May 3rd, the official national Mundillo Day in Puerto Rico. That was one of the first times that like an artisanal tradition or lace making tradition has been recognized in Puerto Rico because of the importance that it has for our culture. Lace making is not just about doing lace making, but about doing community, about telling stories, and that's what we're gonna be addressing tonight. I get like emotional because this particular event is between two very special people at Centro, Glorimar Garcia and our directora, Jomaira Figueroa. They're gonna be in conversation tonight about Glorimar's work, but also about diasporic collage and the exhibition that we have on our gallery. So feel free to participate, feel free to make your questions, and to share your stories, because we all have stories about, lace in our lives, in our homes. Just seeing people in the gallery, they're like, oh, that me recuerda a mami, or me recuerda a mi tía. So this is gonna be like a very special night. We're so excited to have you here as part of this cafecito. And please enjoy your night. After the conversation, there's gonna be a Q&A. Please raise your hand and wait for the microphone so we can record your questions online. All right? Pues con ustedes, sin más, Glorimar Garcia and Jomaira Figueroa.
Thank you, Ángel Antonio. And for those of you who don't know, Ángel Antonio Ruiz Lavoy is the inaugural Director of Arts and Culture at CENTRO, a very long overdue position in which he's doing some really incredible work with the Arts and Culture Unit as well as the media team. Thank you, media team, for being here. So legit every time. Esta silla es bien bajita, me caí patas arriba, okay? Empezamos bien. Welcome everybody. I am so happy to have you here tonight. Some of you might come because it's an art event, some of you might come because of Centro, some of you might be here because you love Mundillo, want to hear more about it. And so for all of you, welcome. Some of you might just be here because there's free food, little snacks, and I welcome that as well. I am so happy to be here with Glorimar Garcia, who's an arts researcher here at Centro, but whose piece serendipitously made it into diasporic collage. So what I want to do today is I want to read a little bit about, or tell you a little bit about diasporic collage, which is the exhibition that is in the new Centro Gallery. Finally, after almost a decade, we finally got the gallery that was promised to the Puerto Rican diaspora. It took a lot of collective work and effort to have that happen, and we're just so happy to be able to have this space. And then I'll talk to you a little bit, I'll introduce Glorimar and talk about Mundillo, and then I have some questions for Glorimar, but we're so excited to welcome your questions. And so I'll just start by talking about the exhibition for which I was one of the primary curators. Diasporic Collage, Puerto Rico and the Survival of a People, honors Puerto Rican identities in the archipelago and its diasporas. Our colonial status and geographic location situate us as a locus of global encounters and ongoing displacement. As such, the exhibition is not only about the diaspora of Puerto Ricans outside of Puerto Rico to the US, but also of diasporas that come to Puerto Rico, such as the Chinese diaspora, the Arab diaspora, right, Dominican and Cuban diasporas. All of these people that encounter us in Puerto Rico and of which we make a collage of belonging with. We can understand the Puerto Rican diaspora as a collage of overlapping histories of colonialism, resistance, and survival. And the exhibition thinks about collage both as a practice, so you can see some of the pieces are actually collage pieces, such as pieces by Glorimar Garcia, but also as a metaphor. One of the main quotes that we had in thinking about diaspora was the fact that diaspora scatters us, sometimes away from our homeland, sometimes away from our family, our kin, our friends, but that collaging is an act that brings us back together. right? As is lace making. It brings together these independent threads, right? The exhibition is also thinking about the close relationship between photography and collage, which are both notable as 20th century art forms. And its point of departure is the very first major documentary initiative of the Puerto Rican diaspora, which was Frank Espada's 1979 to 1982. Maybe he kind of did it all the way to 1984. His Puerto Rico diasporic, the Puerto Rican diaspora, themes and the survival of people, the Puerto Rican documentation project, for which he traveled all over the United States, Puerto Rico, and Hawaii, interviewing over 130 people, taking over 4,000 photographs, and documenting the Puerto Rican diaspora and the survival of those various communities. Not just places like New York, but also Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Hawaii, the returned migrants that left the diaspora and went back to Puerto Rico. He did all of those beautiful interviews, and those oral histories are currently being transcribed, translated, and they will be available at the CENTRO archive very soon. But the photographs in the exhibit, when you walk in, really take his work as a point of departure to consider the way that contemporary artists, such as Glorimar, are thinking about the survival of the Puerto Rican people. We're so honored to have this because they honor so many different kinds of diasporas that intersect with Puerto Rico, and they document the communities with care, and they show us a collage of Puerto Rican and Caribbean experiences. So Glorimar is here, and Glorimar works in Mundillo. So I'll talk to you a little bit first about Glorimar, and then I'll tell you a little bit about Mundillo, but then we're gonna get deeper into it in the conversation. Glorimar Garcia is a Brooklyn-based visual artist, curator, and arts administrator here at CENTRO, by the way. Born and raised in Ohio, she studied painting and art history at the Academy of Cincinnati. Rooted in personal experience and research, her work explores aspects of identity, memory, culture, and gender. Garcia merges materials, lace techniques, found objects, salvaging discarded items like baseball cards to explore and manipulate their meaning. Significant projects include Cards for Puerto Rico, a benefit exhibition following the devastating hurricanes of 2017, and commissioned works for the traveling exhibition Diaspora Collage, Puerto Rico and the Survival of a People. Garcia is an active member of the Brooklyn Lace Guild and assisted with curating the first exhibition of members' work, Little Lace. So how many of you here, thank you, Glorimar, for being here. How many of you here have heard about Mundillo? Okay, great. And how many of you have done Mundillo, created Mundillo? Oh, okay. Let's go. To the front, my people. Pull out the bobbins. La almohada, we're getting the bobbins. We're about to make lace. Okay. Well, we know that Mundillo is an art form, and the translation of it is little worlds, right? Because of the way that it's made. These little worlds of lace and also the pillow. It made its way to the archipelago of Puerto Rico during the 19th century, though its origin is thought to be in Italy in the 1500s. Mundillo is a centuries-old bobbin lace technique preserved by skilled artisans, especially in towns like Moca, Puerto Rico, which is known as, anybody? The capital of Mundillo. Okay.
Unless you ask somebody from Isabela.
Or somebody from Caguas, because my tia,
Yeah,
you know,
same.
to write Hartford. Okay. So it's the island wars. Okay, great. It has become a diasporic craft because although many people believe that the Spanish brought Mundillo to Puerto Rico, researchers propose that it actually came from Haiti, and that Haitian workers brought it to Puerto Rico, and they're the true conveyors of Mundillo making in the archipelago. They have a very similar practice of lace bobbin making. Mundillo became not only a cherished craft, but a vital source of income for Puerto Rican women, in particular during Spanish colonial era and beyond that, even to this day. As Adriana Costales del Toro writes in her essay about Glorimar's piece in Diaspora Collage, she says, quote, "Amongst the uncertainty of Mundillo's origins and migratory journeys, it is undeniable that working women were the creators of Mundillo, for which people of high social standing paid. Mundillo was already a migratory art form when it arrived to Puerto Rico, right? Either coming from Spain, from Haiti, from Italy, from anywhere, hundreds of years of overlapping, right, histories. But now, it is yet another signifier of Puerto Rican culture that has traveled with the diaspora here, to Brooklyn, to Centro, to El Barrio. By utilizing Mundillo in her art, Garcia imbues her pieces with this history and literally follows the thread and connects the diaspora," end quote. It's beautiful essay and the catalog that is forthcoming for the exhibition. So I'm gonna start now with the questions. I'm done talking, just some questions. And I'm gonna start with a question about your journey. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey of becoming a visual and sonic artist? Because fun fact, the pieces in the exhibition, the three Mundillo pieces, also are accompanied by a sonic piece. So if you just go into the room very quietly and listen, you can hear her making the mundillo, the bobbin, right? The bobbin lace, you can hear them clicking.
Yeah.
So tell us about the journey of how you became a visual and sonic artist.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for being here. I'm so excited to see so many familiar faces and new faces and lace makers in the crowd.
Welcome, lace makers.
Yeah. So my journey to becoming a visual artist was kind of like never a question. It was like before I can even remember, it was kind of understood that that was my thing, and you know, Christmas presents, birthday presents, everything was always going to be art supplies. And I think as I grew up, it was more kind of a question of like feasibility financially. My family is not, you know, from an arts and culture background. You know, they did take me to museums and things like that, but they are not artists. They're not, you know, they're working class people in Lorraine that migrated from Puerto Rico. And so that idea of like, I'm gonna grow up and be an artist didn't always feel possible for me. But then as time kind of went on and I started to get towards high school, it was kind of like, no, this is the only thing for me. And I think that's also where I started kind of delving a little bit more into my love of art history because of maybe more of the job security and things that a degree in art history and you know, being able to work in arts administration and things like that would afford, rather than me just focusing on my own practice. And so I went to the Art Academy of Cincinnati and also took some classes at University of Cincinnati, and throughout my undergrad classes, there's gonna be a lot of textile puns that just come out, and I'm really sorry, but like the connecting thread of like a lot of my things, whether it was a drawing class or a painting class or a printmaking class or whatever, is that I naturally was incorporating a lot of textiles. For a drawing class, I dipped string in glue to make a three-dimensional drawing, and this was like, you know, before 3D printers, or you know, like I would do a nude study, and instead of drawing it, I would sew it by hand into the paper and things like that. And there wasn't a huge focus on textiles, or you know, now we're seeing the kind of popularity of textile in arts at the art fairs and like in big museums, but at the time it was still definitely considered like, that's craft. Why are you bringing that into your painting class? And that kind of made me question, like, why is it coming in so much, you know? And so as I graduated, moved to New York City, and continued my work, it started to kind of continue to go in that direction. And eventually I ended up making tiny fishnets out of embroidery thread. And I would watch videos of men making fishnets, and then I would just do it really tiny. With like tiny thread, and like do the same techniques but smaller. And so once I felt like I reached kind of the end of where that could go in my work, I was looking for something else, looking for something that could be a little bit more descriptive, or that I could add other interest into instead of just being kind of a grid. And so I played around with a lot of things, and I stumbled upon a video of Mundillo, and it was not like a tutorial or anything. It was just a woman sitting outside in Puerto Rico making Mundillo like silently, so all you could hear was the forest and her bobbins. And I felt instantly like my brain was like sucked back 100 years, that like it felt like a crazy connection. So I just went down that rabbit hole, and there happened to be a 2-day, like a 16-hour workshop really close to me at the Textile Arts Center in Brooklyn, and it was like, you know, gone from there. I joined the Brooklyn Lace Guild that night, like my first day of making Mundillo. And as many of the lace makers here probably know, a really big part of making bobbin laces, the sound and the kind of like sound experience of while you're making lace, the bobbins clinking, and the different ways that they make sound depending on what kind of wood they're made out of, what shape they are, because they come in a lot of different shapes depending on, you know, the origin, like the density of the wood. If they're finished, sometimes they have bangles on the end, so it's like beads clicking together and things like that. And so from the beginning, I knew I wanted to do something with sound, and eventually, you know, the moment came up, and a good friend that does sound work that you'll see on the label, Frank Chalice, that was my collaborator for it. You know, the schedules lined up, and we were finally able to spend a few days recording me making lace, and then also me using all of the surfaces of the bobbin, pillow, the box of pins, like all of the things that come along with lace making to make the sound piece that you'll hear there. And I'm hoping to do a little bit more with that, because it is really like a integral part of making the lace, the sound.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. I really love that part of like the sonic of like the geography of the space that you're in. I know that my tia makes like a mundillo en her marquesina, and she does like talleres or workshops for the women in the community. And although she never actually offered to teach me, she just gives me a lot of it. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna have a conversation with her. But I really love the idea that you go from like making little fishnets to little worlds, like little mundillo, right? Like there's something really powerful about that. Pero nena, you're from Ohio.
I am.
¿Qué conoces aquí? No, I'm just kidding.
I know, no, like
Wow.
for real though.
Yeah. So can you talk to us about Ohio and about how Lorraine, right? Lorraine, Ohio. How Lorraine, Ohio shaped your worldview as a Puerto Rican, as a diasporic Puerto Rican, as a diasporic Puerto Rican artist. Like Lorraine, Ohio is the Midwest. I live there, so I know. Okay, so like for like a hot minute in the Midwest, not in Lorraine.
Yeah.
So dímelo. How'd you
Yeah.
get here? What happened? How did that shape you?
So
It's like I feel like an anthropologist. I'm like Puerto Rican from Ohio.
Ohio, yes.
Tell me, how was it?
Yeah, growing up, that was always the response when I went to Puerto Rico, and you know, it was very clear, like, oh, she speaks Spanish, but she's not from here. So like, they would try to be nice and ask, like, where are you from in the diaspora? And they would be like, are you from New York or Miami?
Yeah.
And I would be like, Ohio, and the response would be, why?
Yeah.
Why? And it's actually, yeah, like, so my family migrated to Lorraine, Ohio, which is the northern part of Ohio, pretty close to Lake Erie, and also pretty close to like Cleveland, close to Cedar Point, if you like roller coasters. And up there, like by the time I got there, it was like, oh yeah, like this is just, we're all Puerto Ricans here. But the migration started there back in the 50s. And it started with, you know, the first 50 brought over to work in the mills, and then slowly more people came over. Slowly, you know, they were able to start forming a community with the help of the Mexican community that was already there. CENTRO did a really beautiful video about the kind of origins of that that you can watch, and I loved watching that video because it felt like I was gonna see one of my family members like walk by at some point. And my family came in the late 70s, early 80s. My grandfather was a teacher in Puerto Rico and brought the family over, you know, not all at once, but bit by bit until they were all there. And then my mom came after she had already graduated from college, and a lot of her siblings were coming over for work and things like that. And so then that's when my parents met, once they were already migrated in Ohio. And yeah, me and my sister were raised, you know, in a Puerto Rican community in like every sense of the word, from church, which is referenced in the pieces, you know, being all in Spanish, to even speaking Spanish in school, speaking Spanish at home. And when we left at a pretty young age, it feels like I was there for much longer, because when we left Lorraine to move to Southern Ohio for a little bit, it seemed like we were going back like every weekend. So it still felt like home, even though I left when I was pretty young. And that is kind of what I tell people is like my migration story of like me and my sister and our family leaving this Puerto Rican community and then suddenly realizing that you're another, that you didn't realize that you were in that space. We moved to Southern Ohio to a very white suburb of Cincinnati called Mason, and there was not much around as far as Puerto Ricans. And then eventually, when there was more Puerto Ricans, it was because it was our family that moved down from Lorraine. And, very, very little of that. That's when I started, losing my Spanish and not speaking it as much, and going through that motion of at first really trying to assimilate, and then at a certain point kind of really realizing, like, try as hard as you can, you're never going to assimilate, so you might as well just be the other and lean in that way. And then luckily kind of like later in high school, I did start to get a group of friends that weren't Puerto Rican, but were all kind of minorities in their different ways, and at certain points people called us like the UN, because it was like a little bit of everything, but we all gravitated towards each other because of this very this white, almost southern city, because Cincinnati is like, right above Kentucky. And so that kind of gives you a sense of what it's like there. And yeah, so that was really good. It helped me kind of come into my own and lean back into that side of myself, and to be able to start exploring that in undergrad, like we talked about, through textiles and things like that. But it wasn't until I came to New York that it really kind of like sparked again, because then in New York it was this sense of like, oh my God, I kind of already feel like home because I'm surrounded by people that are like me again, but they're not like me because they're Nuyorican, or they're not like me because they're more recently migrated. And so it was kind of that thing again where I was like, am I trying to assimilate with Nuyoricanness to try and be closer to that community, even though that isn't necessarily my lived experience? Lorraine Ricans aren't the same as Nuyoricans. They have very different, different experiences, and it developed differently in those places. And so that really was a moment of like, I've been here for about 10 years now, and that was a moment of like, okay, so this does feel like home, and I do love this community, but how do I also acknowledge my differences and celebrate them and honor my own history and my family's history, and the way that Lorraine was, like their introduction to living in the diaspora, and able to kind of help them maintain a lot of that because of the Puerto Rican community that was there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's so important to kind of think about the different experiences even within the Puerto Rican diaspora. And the Puerto Rican Midwest is one, and you've touched upon some of the ways that it becomes different in the kinds of encounters and community connections that are made there. One of my former colleagues, Dele Fernandez, wrote the book Making the Mexican City, about Grand Rapids, Michigan, another city like Lorraine, Ohio, where it was the encounters of Puerto Ricans and Mexicans that really created these unified forms of cultural keeping, right, and coalition building. And so much of that is so true in your experience, but then also your little UN, right? All these other folks as you move into these spaces. But I think, the Midwest is becoming such an important place for Puerto Rican studies as a place. They're calling themselves the Midwest Mafia, which I love. And it is really like Wisconsin, Chicago, Michigan, Ohio, this whole kind of group of folks who are in Indiana, who are doing really incredible work, and they just secured a big grant to do more Midwest Puerto Rican stuff. So I'm really excited for the future of that, really showcasing that perspective and that experience. That's something that Frank Espada had in his mind in the 70s. Like, our people are having different experiences depending on where they're migrating to, whether they're doing factory work or agricultural work, right? Whether in the mills, right? And then the generations of their children are growing up with a particular kind of like cultural attachment and nostalgic attachment to Puerto Rico, but the situatedness of them is having, they're having these different experiences, and we should pay attention to that. And so in this way, there's such a full circle moment. And there's a full circle moment in one of the pieces about Ohio and Frank Espada, a connection there. But I'm gonna actually ask you, we can get there, and maybe you can get there in this question, but can you share with us your approach to creating the 3 pieces that you made for Diasporic Collage?
So yes, I was commissioned to do these pieces for Diasporic Collage, and at the start it was basically like a time crunch of like, I'm gonna make as many as I can. And I think originally I was like, I'll try for 4 or 6, and no, that was insane. So we ended with 3, and you see up on the video screen a lot of the time lapses of me working on the lace for these and also the collages for these. Shout out Andres for helping me put this together at the last minute. That was something I was so glad that you and Alina mentioned early on, like, please record as much as you can, because I think it probably would have slipped my mind and I would have, just started. But when I started on the pieces, I got a lot of the background on the show, and also a lot of the pieces that the other artists were doing, I was added later. And so a lot of the pieces were already decided for the show, which felt good, because then I could kind of get a sense of what was already going to be in the space and kind of surrounding my pieces, which I knew were going to most likely be the smallest in the show. And I started out with the archival materials that Jomaida provided, which were the show cards for the exhibition of the Frank Espada work, and which I love because I hate...
They're from like the 80s and 90s. So Frank Espada's son passed me some of the original show cards from Frank Espada's like 40 exhibitions. He sent them to me in the mail. These beautiful archival materials. We commissioned Glorimar. I give them to her.
I know, which was terrifying.
I was terrified to even have them. I was happy to hand them over to you. I was like, what do I do with this piece of history? But then you cut them up, and I was like, oh, Lord, okay.
Listen, it took months for me to be able to cut them up.
Yeah.
And even, I feel like in the video, you can probably see me like...
Hesitation?
Yeah, scared.
Yeah.
But I literally just kept them in this archival folder for a very long time, and just started playing with them as far as like looking at connections between the photographs visually or content-wise, and then started pulling things out that way. At the start, I imagined the collages being much more mixed and not random, but much more eclectic than they ended up being. And that ended up being like a very big weight on my shoulders, because I felt like each piece had to represent the entirety of my experience, and that was like, that's a huge prompt, and why are you doing that to yourself? And so I was like, okay, so what's the alternative of like making each piece its own little world of it's, just a piece that I want to focus on. And the 3 that ended up coming out were there was a few postcards that had images of the flag. There was a few postcards that had images of women and girls. And then there was a few postcards that had either elements or textures of interior spaces, like lace curtains, or like patterns on fabric or furniture, or on somebody's shirt. And also there was a photograph of a man in front of his restaurant. And so that felt like it was all kind of home food, and less focused on people. And so those ended up being my 3 starting points. The one with the flag, I knew right off the bat that I was going to use this very iconic picture of my grandfather, which I love. That is him on the day of him graduating with his master's, and somebody is holding a big ass flag in front of him, which just made me so happy that like I just, not a little flag, like somebody was like, I'm gonna bring my 6-foot flag for this occasion.
Absolutely.
And he just looks amazing, and I love it. And so I knew that one was gonna start there, and then that one kind of turned into starting with my grandfather, and then turned into their story of migrating from Palo Seco Maunabo into Lorraine. And so you see their home that my father grew up in, and then the home that my grandparents that like I grew up in, and little bits and pieces of the family, my grandfather holding 2 of his daughters, and then eventually my grandfather sitting on a couch next to my sister and my Tio Kemi, who is very close in age to us, and they were the first 2 of us born in the diaspora. So it felt like it was kind of the full circle of that one. And the lace for that reflects the geometry of the flag, the colors, and I wanted to feel just, not that, feminine and masculine or set in stone, but I wanted it to feel reflective of some of the imagery in the piece. And then the one that was home felt really straightforward. I focused on images of my family, the interiors of their homes. You see photographs from the Little Blue Store, which is what me and my sister called this one store that had all of the Latino products. So if we didn't find it at the grocery store, that was like our next stop to get all of the verdura and everything. And, you know, a plate of maduros on my mom's stove, a picture of a baptism in my grandmother's church where you actually can see the women in the church wearing veils. Which was you know, very, very, very early kind of exposure of me to lace, was the women wearing veils in church. And then the middle one, it, you know, sprouted from the pictures of Paloma, and then also the woman that migrated back to Mount Naval. So Frank Espada did go to Lorraine and did oral histories. I listened to those, and then when I found out that that photograph was not taken in Lorraine, but was taken of a returned migrant that lived in Lorraine at the same time as my family, and then returned to Mount Naval, which, like I said, is where my family from. It was like a really beautiful moment of like, I need to put these together. And since there wasn't a lot of photos taken by Frank Espada of Lorraine, I felt like being able to insert my family photos into that same space that he, you know, they probably passed each other on the street when he was doing these oral histories. And that one focused all on my relationship with my mom and grandmothers and great-grandmothers, and this feeling of being held and being like raised by these women's hands. And you know, obviously that has a very strong connection to me making this lace, and also the fact that my two grandmothers are the two halves of my name. So that is where the title came from, of En tus manos en mi nombre, that like I carry both of them in my name everywhere I go. And that one, then I was like, I challenged myself and I did it. That one's the most difficult lace with the most bobbins, from a book of patterns that was published by the Puerto Rican lacers to preserve some of the lace patterns in Puerto Rico. And then that one had like hearts and flowers, and like, you know, it felt very kind of tender to the material that was in the collage.
Yeah, I think it's like so serendipitous that Glorimar and I had this conversation about your artwork, and then I was like, you have to make something for the show. But that then, even within the arc of the show that had already been created, you found all of these synergies between your own family history and the Frank Espada interviews that were the point of departure for the whole show.
Yeah.
So it was really beautiful to see that piece and that woman that's in the show, but then it's also in your piece. And the fact that maybe she encountered your family in the Little Blue Store, right? Or somewhere, right?
Exactly.
So I really love that. And so I think there's so much about the practice of collage that connects us, but even in diaspora, we often think about it as a dispersal, but it's also this connected to other communities, right? And so other folks who in Puerto Rico might not have crossed paths there, but they crossed paths because they went to Virginia together, or, you know, Hoboken, New Jersey. Jersey, what up? Okay. So do you have a favorite of the three pieces that you made? You do?
I don't know if it's favorite, but I think definitely the one that we were just speaking about with the grandmothers and daughters in hands, that is the one out of all three of them that I feel really strongly that it could be a complete standalone piece, whereas the other two, like I said, I was kind of like focusing in, and it feels like part of a bigger story. And so I feel like those work really, really well in conjunction with the others, and eventually I want to add more to the series, to, you know, tell even more kind of stories about my experience and my family and things like that. But I think the one with the mothers and daughters and even like, you know, there's kind of like little Easter eggs in there for like me and my family. Like there's a like for some reason they're all kind of wearing the same color blue, even though it's both sides of my family, maternal and paternal. And so I snuck in the lighthouse in Lorraine, which was very special to my grandmother because she grew up near a lighthouse in Puerto Rico. And I know a lot of Puerto Ricans in Chicago also have like a similar relationship to the lake and the water and that kind of horizon. And like lots of other like little moments like that. I also collaged on top of it a poem that I had written years ago about my name and the pronunciation of my name and my grandmother's. And so that one I felt like was the last lace that I started and also the most time intensive. And I think it out of the three, I feel like that one could stand on its own, and I could, continue to make a series just based off of that one by itself.
Yeah, each one of the pieces is so intricate. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at them, I would urge you, please do. It's on the table, and the exhibition is set up so that that table feels like a kitchen table. It feels like la cocina de tu abuela, de tu mamá, right? Come, take a seat, take a look, and then the mundillo is placed there in the center, so you can sit, listen, you can look at some of the other photos, look around the exhibition, but that's the centerpiece there. And so each one of them is just so full of so much, right? And so mundillo, as we talked about, is this 100 years old lace making practice that the stronghold of it contemporarily is in Puerto Rico. It is the place that keeps it alive. Puerto Ricans keep mundillo alive. But because we are in 2025 and fake news is everywhere, right? Misconceptions abound. I'd love for you to share with us, like, maybe some of the misconceptions around mundillo and mundillo making that you've heard or encountered. Like, yeah.
So, I mean, I think in general with lace, one of the very common misconceptions, I think because of how it looks, is that it's fragile. And so a lot of times when I have had more of like an open studio or people have seen me, and I've offered like, just give it a try. And they're like, no, like, I don't want to break it. Like, I don't want to, and it's like, this is something that is meant to be worn and washed and worn and washed. Like, it's,
we put babies in it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Like, it's not fragile. It's meant to be, it's meant to be something that was used and washed and abused and then passed on to your children and that kind of thing. So it's definitely not something, like once you take it off the pillow and it's done, like it would be pretty difficult for you to like rip it, and so I think that's one thing, and I think that's also like an interesting investigation of like, what do you associate with lace that makes you think that it's something that's fragile, and is that the fact that you associate it with femininity, or is it, like what part of this very complicated craft that women do makes you think that it's not strong.
Well, just because it's like delicate doesn't mean it's not strong.
Exactly.
Right?
Like it's
beautiful
so
it's made to withstand.
Exactly. Right, which is why there's places like the Met that have 100 years old lace that is still there and able to be used and looked in and handled and things like that. I think another misconception is that it's dead, or that it's dying, and I think that is a misconception, because yes, there are places in different countries that at one point had a huge thriving economy of lace, and that's not necessarily the case, but that doesn't mean that it's on the verge of extinction. We do have centers of research, we do have people that have their doctorate in studying lace. We have even in Puerto Rico, like every part of Puerto Rico has its own lace guild, or there is an international organization of lace. There's conventions. Puerto Rico still has their lace festival, and so I think just because it's maybe not seen as much, or because it's not worn as much, or purchased as much, it feels like it's on the verge of going away, but it's really not. Like, we really have there's a lot of people that are incredibly passionate about it and are keeping it alive, and it's not as dire, I think, as people think it is. And I think One of the other misconceptions that I had in one of those experiences where I was in an open studio so people could kind of come in and out. And, I think on that day, I think out of the lace makers that were there, I think I was the only person of color, which is not representative of the lace guild that I'm in. I'm not the only person of color. But I kind of got confronted in this way of like, why would you want to do something that in the past put women in this position to be making something that they were underpaid for and in terrible conditions and things like that, and like kind of was confronting me, and I was like, well, sounds like you answered your own question. Like, that is why I want to do that. Like, I'm standing on the shoulders of these lace makers, and I want to bring attention to it and recognition. And also that misconception that like that all of the lace makers were like white nuns in Europe, especially in Puerto Rico, like you said, like the majority of the people making this lace were women of color, and that's
in the barriadas.
And that's where
urbanizaciones, right?
Yeah, and like that's what I identify. I identify with the women making it. I don't identify with the people that were purchasing it for not enough money to pay the lace makers and wearing it, and I think that's where it is just a misconception sometimes when people hear that you're a lace maker, that like you're making lace to wear it and you're identifying with that side. And that would take forever for me to make, when I got married, people were like, are you gonna make your wedding dress? And I was like, if I want to get married in like 2080, sure, like that's crazy. But yeah, so I think those are a few of them.
No, I love that. Thank you for sharing that, because I think all of those are so important in terms of the way that we think about Mundillo's impact on the world and also our interpretation of it and our contemporary interpretation of it. I think it's really easy. No, it's not easy to be radicalized, right? Like historically, and to have your consciousness built up. But then sometimes we do so in such a fast motion that we erase a whole group of people who labored under varying conditions to create these things. And for me, coming from a working poor family in Puerto Rico and the diaspora, Mundillo was this beautiful practice. But even though maybe it's the upper castas that were commissioning pieces, it was the families still making for their own families, and baptism gowns and veils for weddings, and even within the barriada, that economy created this real sense of pride of creation, and that continues here, and that you're such a fierce defender of it, I think is so beautiful and so important. Thank you so much for that. And I guess I have one final question before we open up the floor. So you're a young artist, okay? What does it mean for you? How does it feel for you for your work to be shown in a show like Diasporic Collage? But more than that, for it to be shown in New York City, it was shown in Michigan, it's gonna go to Puerto Rico, from there potentially to Chicago and onward. So your work will be seen in many places. How does it feel?
No voy a llorar.
Okay.
So I'm gonna keep it short.
I'm sorry.
So you don't make me cry. I think in every sense it's full circle. You mentioned the show that I did following Hurricane Maria, and that was something that really was a catalyst of like a shift in my work to confront some of these things about my family and identity and where I come from in a way that I think maybe before that I felt like I have my whole life to do that. I have my whole life to like think about these things and explore that in my work, and after that I was like, I don't. The Puerto Rico that I remember from my childhood already is not there, and my family members are getting older, and I didn't want to put it off anymore. And so that became a really important moment for me to start doing research and start prioritizing my practice as much as I could while working full time as an art administrator. And so it feels full circle for that because of the connection that these are a departure from the baseball card series and from the fishnets and things like that. It also feels full circle because, like you said, it started in the Midwest. which is amazing that like I moved to New York to be an artist, and then my first museum show is in the Midwest, and it's like you gotta go back. And then for it to come here to Centro, that like if you had told me then that I would be in an exhibition here, I would have passed out. Like I would have been so thrilled.
We had to convince her. She was not.
Yeah.
She was not having
Yeah.
it. And I was
Yeah.
like, I have to have it.
And it feels full circle also in the sense of we were talking about this earlier, that during the opening you all gave the artists in the show an opportunity to speak, because a lot of them came to the opening, and many of them were really excited because this was their first show in New York, because they live in other areas. And for me, it wasn't my first show in New York, but it felt like my first show in my own community, and like not my another show in New York where I was the only Puerto Rican, and so it felt like my New York debut as well, because it was the first time that like my people were looking at my work and taking it in and understanding it and not needing explanations, or not needing like a translation, or not needing a tutorial on how to say my name. Like it was like my debut into having literally everyone that I work with and respect, and artists that I work with, and just being in the company of all of the artists in the show. I'm not going to go through all of them, but as you know, like Edra Soto, Daniel Lin, Frank Espada, like that is not something that at this point in my career I would have dreamed that I would be in a group show with them. But at the same time, looking at the show, like it does make sense, and I'm glad that I didn't turn it down out of fear or intimidation. I just so.
Yeah. She's gonna make me cry. Oh my god. Before we open up the floor for questions, Glorimar mentioned that she has one of the pieces, and in one of the pieces she has a poem that she wrote. Could you read?
If
you can
I
find
will
it?
probably cry.
Okay, don't
Pero
cry.
that's okay.
I'll cry for you. But if you could read the poem for us, and then we can get the mics passed around. Is this mic is gonna get passed around for questions? Okay, perfect. So I can give you this mic. Thank you.
So like I said, this was a poem I wrote in undergrad, and at the time I was studying for my art history degree, and I wrote about ancient Egyptian pharaoh, and was thinking about their religious practices of having their name said out loud in the afterlife. It's short, I can make it. Okay. Sometimes I whisper my name to hear myself, to hear the R rolling right. Sometimes I whisper Glorimar, so I can hear my name soft and right. Sometimes I whisper my name so I don't forget how to roll my R. Sometimes I whisper Glorimar so I can hear my grandmother's voice.
Do we have questions?
I have a question. Thank you. This is really beautiful. And I'm going to cry too. My grandmother, who's from Moca, taught me how to make mundillo. I want to say I started making it with her maybe around the age of 8. I used to sit with her on the marquesina to make mundillo. So it's very emotional for me because I've not seen a mundillo in a long time. I have maybe two questions. One, I'm wondering, I had a chance to see your work, and it's really, really beautiful. I'm wondering how this film fits in with the work, with the art itself. If you could talk about that a little bit. And I'm also wondering, outside of this piece, this work of art that you've created where you use mundillo, do you make mundillo just like for other things? I know not for your wedding dress, but for like other things, or I don't know, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Like, was and partly what I'm trying to say is like, is the Mundillo, was it created here as part of this art, this work of art that you made? Or is Mundillo like part of your regular practice?
Thank you, and thank you for being here. The video, like I said, it was actually the curator's idea for me to start documenting the process of, how Mundillo is made and how I made it. I tried as much as possible to, set up the camera as much as I could when I was working. And it's still kind of in process of what I'm gonna do with it. After I finished the commissions, I took a pretty big break of making any art or, handling any of it. Because I basically, breathed and slept and made Mundillo, and that was it, until they were done. And the Centro staff can attest to me coming in the day before they were due at MSU to photograph them without having slept, literally cutting threads off so that we could photograph them and ship them overnight. And so with these videos, I do want to do something eventually that will incorporate maybe that sound piece or a different sound piece, maybe some poetry and other visuals, because the sound piece itself feels kind of like a self-portrait, and having all this documentation of this practice. I love that you called it a practice, because it really does become this kind of meditative process, and this daily practice of going back to the pillow, and sometimes all you do is undo the work you did yesterday because of the mistakes, and then you go back again, and it really is that. So eventually I do want to do something with these, and for today, our wonderful media manager, Andres, put this together for me, so that everybody in the audience, if they had, if they've seen Mundillo but never seen the process of making it, could see it, and also to see literally the pieces in the gallery being produced, the lace that's there. And the second question. So when I started to make and learn Mundillo, I didn't start off the bat incorporating it into my visual art practice. I focused only on learning and mastering the techniques that I wanted to master, and growing in my lace making until I felt that I comfortably could start designing my own lace, because that was the goal, was to incorporate it into my practice and be able to draw my own pattern to depict what I wanted to in my visual work. So the series before this is a series of velos that are with the baseball card series, and so those are viewed upright in shadow boxes, and it has the baseball card found object assemblages, and then over top of that there's a lace veil to recall the lace veils that the women wore in my grandmother's church, and think about the kind of double-edged sword that was, of them wearing veils and having kind of a more strict religious practice, but then the ability that they had to use their veils as the way of showing their personality in the way that they could not, because they didn't wear makeup, because they did not cut their hair, because they had to wear skirts only, and did not have extravagant fashion, but then you could see in their veils little parts of their personality peek out, and I love that. So I love the idea of making these little veils over what basically is a portrait of men, these baseball cards, and a portrait of masculinity, and a portrait of Puerto Rican obsession with baseball, and all of these things. So that is kind of where the gender things come in. And so yeah, primarily I use it in my visual art practice, and then other than that, I will also make it as gifts. So bookmarks and smaller doilies and things like that. Since it is so time consuming, when I do things outside of things for a piece, it does have to be like something relatively small. But I also don't really have those moments where I see a pattern that like I just love and like I want to make a bookmark or things like that when I'm not working on like something specific.
Thank you.
Hi, it's on. Hi, Glory, this is beautiful. So, I know you in the process a bit, but I was wondering, and I was thinking about the symbolism, like belonging and identity and ancestry, and kind of the ambivalence we hold as Puerto Ricans from the diaspora, not being born there, colorism, all the different types of ambivalence, and just watching this process and just feeling it's such a reparative experience, right? The symbols are, for sure, but I'm wondering if you could speak a little more to like the healing process that you feel when you're creating or kind of what comes up. Yeah.
Oh, yes, thank you, and thank you for coming, Melissa. There's definitely so much of that in the process of making it. Once you start to get into the pattern and your body kind of starts to remember the pattern, it becomes a little bit more of muscle memory, because it is like the same movements. It's all a variety of two movements between the two bobbins, which is like a twist and a flip, and all of the things are just made up of those two things. And so once you get into that process, it does become a very internal moment where your hands are very busy and your brain is able to kind of go other places. And I've heard a lot of lace makers say that your hands realize you've made a mistake before your eyes do, because your hands feel when they did something different that they weren't supposed to. And so in the process of making these, there was a lot of that. There was a lot of connection to, like I said, my grandmothers, and especially my grandmother Gloria, who did not make mundillo, but did sew, and was a source of a lot of inspiration for me in doing anything with textiles. Me remembering the kind of meditative rock of her foot pedaled singer machine, and me just like sitting on the floor seeing her and watching her just like this tiny woman just master this like terrifying machine when I was a little girl. I think at one point I saw her put the needle through her finger, and I was just like, oh my gosh, like how does she just like, it felt like she was like controlling a dragon to me as a little girl. And so I felt very connected to her throughout these, and I felt very connected to her, especially in moments of fatigue or mental fatigue of like, oh my God, I can't look at this pattern anymore. Or if I get stabbed with a needle one more time, or, like any times that things were going wrong, it just felt like I got another wind for through those connections. And that was also a blessing about this project, is that when the lace became too much, then I could shift to the collages, or when the collages were like not working and I needed to get things reprinted, or I needed to wait a while for things to dry, then I could shift to the lace, and then the lace would be kind of like a welcome, safe place where I'm like, okay, the collages, I don't know what I'm doing, but at least the lace, I have a pattern to follow. That is something that also I love about the lace making, is that you're a visual artist too, so you know what it's like to never know when a piece is finished, and never know if you're going to go too far and ruin it, or if you're stopping too early, or if you're, you want to take a break and then come back to it. But with lace, it's like that's the pattern. It's either done or it isn't. So like when I think I told you early on, like I was like, yeah, like if I don't finish it, like people are going to be able to tell that there's like 2 inches missing. Like, whereas like the collages, it's like if I didn't get them all the way to where I wanted, then when I get them back from the show, I can continue kind of working on them and getting them to a better place. But the lace, if it's not finished, it's not finished. Like, there's not any way to kind of make up for that. But it's also a nice part of it that when it's finished, it's like, and you're done. You can't make it any better. You can't go back now. It's, it's finished. And you kind of take it off the pillow and it's free, you know. So yeah.
It's free. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, I followed you on Instagram a couple weeks ago.
Oh, great. Thank you.
I have a comment and then a question. As a Boricua art history student, there's never been a more important time right now for you to be making art like this, for you to use your beautiful voice and show the world this art. So I say thank you so much. I come from a family of seamstresses, and thank you. Your art is incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
To the art history side of myself, I want to know how long from conception to final product
Yeah.
your works typically take.
Okay.
And your compositions are so strong. I wonder how you go about picking specific, or how you go about cutting out specific figures,
Yeah.
etc., and how you put them all together.
Great.
Thank you so much for that comment.
And for that question, and I'm so glad to hear that you're an art history student. Yeah, so these actually, because I had the deadline, I was working at my fastest that I could. And so I started these in May of last year, and then finished them on July 31st, because they were due on the 1st in Michigan. And so that's like the exact time that I had when I met with the curators. I was like, I'm gonna be honest, I can't even start on these until after my wedding. And then right after my wedding, I had revision surgery on my ankle. And so I wish I would have had those extra months, but life happens, and I was like, I can't start these for a couple months. And I just started thinking about them, so that when I did start, I would have, some things started in my brain that I wanted to do. So that was, if I add it together, I could probably get an accurate time. As far as the lace, I can kind of have a better time because I have the videos, and because I remember for myself also, like, I wouldn't want to stop mid item. So like I wouldn't usually want to start one of the hearts and not finish it. Like if I started one of the hearts, I would want to like end there, so then I would know where to pick up, and that usually would take like about an hour, or like one of the flowers would take about an hour. I think like I said, that one was the most complicated one. The collages was kind of more up and down and around. Like I said, it took me a while to finally gain the strength to be able to cut into these archival materials. So I was like, I cannot go to Jomaida and be like, you have some more that I can use. So I was like, if I cut, like it has to be it. And as far as the compositions, I did have the Frank Espada pieces to work off of. And so that was helpful because it kind of started this prompt of responding to that and how I was going to include those. I started with the lace patterns because I knew that they were going to take the longest. So then I also had the kind of size that I was working with. I started on a piece of like semi-transparent vellum, and started playing with things being behind the vellum to kind of be muted, and then things being on top of the vellum, and started playing from there. It took a few different rounds of me printing the family photos. A lot of the family photos were sent to me by family members, in New Jersey, Ohio, and Puerto Rico. Like I got photos from everybody, and so I was printing them, and that also gave me the capability of printing them at whatever size I wanted. So some of them I enlarged, some of them I cropped, some of them I shrunk down and would print like a tiny kind of wallet size, which helped because in the first round I would pick a lot of the things that I liked, and then putting them together, it would look like a yearbook photo because every single person's head was the exact same size going across the entire piece. And so I, reminded myself of my art school training of like, you can't use one size paintbrush on the entire painting. And so I was like, okay, I need different size brush strokes. So I need small ones, I need big ones, I need to like zoom in on certain things. And then start playing with other materials like paint chips from my paint palette, or you know, like other textures and things aside from just the photos. And yeah, it was a lot of placing without gluing or placing without sewing. And until I felt like absolutely certain that it was, you know, that was where I wanted it, and then I would, you know, felt comfortable sewing into it or gluing it down. So yeah, the compositions took a while, and there was one nightmare that happened that I made one of the collages a little bit too big for the lace. And so then when I took the lace off the pillow, my husband had to talk me down. And then eventually I slept on it, and the next day I had to like cut the collage in half and then shrink it by like 1 inch so it would fit the lace.
I love that you like nightmare. I was like, oh, you were dreaming about it. No, but it was a real nightmare.
No, it was,
real nightmare.
yeah,
Okay.
it was, because I was like, if the lace was too big, that would be fine, but I was like stretching it, and I was like, it's not gonna fit, there's no way, so I had to, so if you look at the back of that piece, you'll see like the cut down the middle where I had to like piece it back together, but yeah.
I want to thank you, Glorimar, for sharing your art and your story with us today. It's so beautiful. I feel so honored to have you here at Centro as our arts researcher, but also to have your piece and your artwork also live here through the end of the exhibition. I really love that you could bring your full self and all your talents with you to work and bring them to bear in this really historic and special place.
Yeah.
And I'm thankful to all of you for coming out here on a Wednesday evening to listen to Glorimar share her beautiful work. And I invite you to come talk to Glorimar. Also take a look at the exhibition. I think we still have some snacks outside and whatnot. Pero muchas gracias, and I hope you have a beautiful evening.